Glenn Donahuy's preliminary hearing was postponed yet again. The first time that hearing was scheduled was April 14th. Donahuy refused to appear in court, and then a competency evaluation was ordered for him. On April 28th, he did show up in the courtroom, but the competency evaluation wasn't complete. That brings us to today, June 2nd, and that evaluation still isn't finished.
We are still, I believe, waiting a KCPC evaluation. Is that correct?
That's correct. I just spoke with Mr. Donahue. He has not been video evaluated yet, so we are still waiting on that.
After today's hearing wrapped up, I made my way from Fayette District Court right across the street to Mashney Law. That's where I talked to Lexington attorney and legal expert Abe Mashney. He says during a competency evaluation, the defendant will see a psychiatrist and take an assessment to determine whether or not the person can rationally participate in the defense.
They have a right to be assessed, and they have a right to be determined whether or not they're competent or not.
Chapter 504 of Kentucky statutes outlines competency, stating that every criminal defendant has a right to be competent in every stage of proceedings. People can be found competent, incompetent, or the court can say the person could gain competency in the foreseeable future, which Mashney says means 365 days.
If they are ruled not competent, then the prosecution could ask for a second opinion, but ultimately there's a hearing in which the judge has to determine whether or not the defendant is competent.
But there are some backlogs for these evaluations in the system.
I've had one that took about 8 months, and that's not uncommon. If the state and the government is going to incarcerate somebody, take their freedoms away, at bare minimum, we want to know, can they grasp the concept of what type of proceedings we're in, and can we rationally participate in the defense?
Donahuy's preliminary hearing is rescheduled to July 14th at 8:30 here at Fayette District Court. In Lexington, Amelia Lee, WKYT.